Hey everybody, and welcome to my presentation on authentic assessment. I know this is a topic that the three of us have discussed at some length and in a variety of different ways over the course of the time that we've had together in the two classes that the three of us have shared specifically. But this project was specifically nice in terms of getting a better view of what authentic assessment is in terms of theory and practice, where it comes from, and what connections it has to some of the other theories in education. Specifically, some of the work I found most helpful were the Authentic Assessment Toolbox, which is a website created and curated by John Mueller, who is a professor at North Central here in Naperville, Illinois, as well as Grant Wiggins, who I inadvertently had read some of his work some time ago about backward design, but hadn't really realized the connection to authentic assessment until thinking about it and researching it a bit more now. And so my research basically started with John Mueller's site, the Authentic Assessment Toolbox, and just to look at what authentic assessment is. And because it's known under a variety of different names, it can be kind of maybe not necessarily misleading, but can get kind of jumbled up in terms of the different types of assessment that exist today. Whether it's design-based assessment, performance-based assessment, or authentic assessment, regardless of the name, the defining characteristic of this type of assessment is the understanding of what the assessment itself is and what its purpose is. And so as a result, anything that falls under this umbrella of authentic assessment inherently by nature understands assessment as a process. More specifically, an iterative process, especially in the work of Grant Wiggins. This is how it's described. But then going kind of a step further beyond just the process itself, the assessment is also centered on real world tasks or some kind of application of what the students have learned in class or exploring in class, or as a result of some kind of their own curiosity. And so the result is a focus that's on student performance and not necessarily student knowledge. Although student knowledge, of course, is going to follow the student performance as the student's able to grow and do more and more things. The artifact that's produced is not necessarily solely based on knowledge or what students are able to remember. And so when we look at traditional assessment versus authentic assessment, the real main departure is this purpose. And so we're not looking for an accumulation of knowledge in our students and things that they can rattle off or check off or mark down correctly on a multiple choice test. What we're looking for is their ability to apply their understanding to perform tasks. And so there's a variety of different ways that we can do this. But this process, what it seeks to do is enhance overall learning. And so students have a variety of different opportunities along the way, but then also on this final assessment to gain knowledge through these real tasks and through the experiences that they're having. The additional component here is where value lies in the assessment itself. And so whereas even the best written, most complicated, well-researched multiple choice assessment is fine and good, really all it gives us in terms of understanding of our students is a lifeless snapshot of what they can do at that given moment. On the other hand, authentic assessment is focused on producing and maintaining and tracking visible, tangible products that the students themselves are producing and they can come back to. And then in addition, the teachers, they come back to that as well as examples for students of what is a good example of meeting expectations for a certain task or potentially exceeding expectations for a certain task. And then on the other hand, as an example for students of a performance task that does require additional development. And so when I was looking at authentic assessment and when I think about my own practice, I focus a lot on just the complete departure from traditional assessment to authentic assessment. But what I soon realized through my research is that Mueller and the other authors that I'd been reading, none of them necessarily says that a move to authentic assessment has to be marked by a complete departure from traditional assessment, and that traditional assessment does still have some role in terms of informing practice and instruction, but shouldn't be the sole determiner of a student's grade or evaluating what a student is able to do with what they're learning. So then what does this mean for schools? And what does this mean in a practical sense? What are some specific examples of authentic assessment in the context of school? The real big thing here is a change in the primary goal of what we do with assessment, especially when we're constantly looking for ways to use assessments to inform our teaching practice, traditional assessments can serve that need quite well in the way in which we can grade them very quickly and gain insight very quickly into what our students know. However, the main impact and push for using authentic assessment is what it does is it allows students to do with what they know rather than accumulate this vast or maybe not so vast hodgepodge of things that they do know that then they can show you as a one shot at assessment. And so what this means is we need to allow our students to do more with what they know and then assess them on those things that they can do and not necessarily on the things that they know. And so as a part of this and the iterative nature of authentic assessment, it's really important that we provide regular feedback to our students. And additionally, along this feedback loop, we also need to make assessment more transparent. So students have an idea of not only where they're going in terms of the unit or the lesson, but then also the specific tasks that they're going to have to do on the assessment itself. So not only is this more meaningful for students in terms of then what they can do with their learning, as well as making their daily tasks and activities have more purpose, but it's also more informative for teachers because the final product, although it may not necessarily be as easy to score and more time is spent evaluating student work, it's more informative of what was effective along the way to the assessment and in terms of what the students can do, what motivates them, what intrigues them about the content, and potentially what could be a continued avenue for exploration for an individual student or a variety of students as the course continues. And so the result is more value in the long term, both for students and for teachers. And so ideally, a move to more authentic assessment creates learning that sticks, but then that also gives the teacher something to continually reference back to for those students to demonstrate growth, but then also to gain deeper understanding into what motivates those students. So not only does assessment become a tool for teaching in terms of informing our practice, moving towards the assessment and after the assessment, but then we're also left with artifacts to be shared with others and can really push our students to be their own advocates in terms of communicating their understanding and showing what they can do, and being able to produce evidence of their own learning for others and not having to rely on scores in a grade book or a letter grade that appears on their transcript. They have something that actually shows what they've learned, what they've been able to do with the things that they're learning. And so what this ends up meaning in terms kind of a continuation of specific applications to teaching implications for our instructional design is it moves students to the center. And so with students at the center and a lot of other different kinds of assessment instructional techniques are moving this way, what stokes progress is feedback and not necessarily extra practice. And so what we also get then is reflection as a window to learning. So we can promote students that then are more willing to and able to reflect on a regular basis about their own learning and the things they can do. And assessment becomes more real and it becomes more regular, which can at first seem like this is a move towards assessing students too frequently, but more regular in the sense that students know when to expect they're going to be assessed on certain learning targets, what they're going to have to do, and what that task will look like itself. And so the fundamental difference is just kind of drive this home in terms of the classroom context is in terms of traditional assessments where we require correct responses for higher scores. Authentic assessments on the other end require high quality products or performances. So maybe not a multiple choice test, but an open-ended question that pushes students to take on a perspective or a role. Similarly, whereas traditional assessments are unknown to students in advance of the assessment and the test is this highly guarded secret, the authentic assessment, on the other hand, is something that the students know they're going to have to do before the assessment and have time to kind of critically reflect on and prepare for in advance. Additionally, traditional assessments are typically a one shot at success, whereas the authentic assessment is iterative by nature. So some other characteristics here was an emphasis on what students know and they can't do, not what they can and cannot do. Use sample student work. Okay, now